Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 20th of July, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information online at weather.gov/Alaska, on social media at facebook.com/NWSAlaska, on Twitter and any one of the office accounts, NWS Alaska, NWS Anchorage, NWS Fairbanks, or NWS Juneau, of course. And we like to use the hashtag AKwx. That means you're talking about Alaska weather. So even if you don't follow us or talk directly to us, if you use that hashtag, know that we see your message and your pictures and your information, and sometimes we'll reshare that as well. So anytime you have a picture, please let us know. We'd love to see that. You can also send us an email at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. That's a great way to reach me and the rest of the Alaska Weather TV team. If you've got questions, comments, things you love about the show, things you hate and really wish we'd change, or something you'd like to see more of or less of, we'd love to fix that for you and make it right. And of course, give you the information that helps you enjoy and stay safe in your Alaska weather, of course. You can always call the weather info line at 800-472-0391 to get your automated forecast too. Make sure you write down those numbers as you're punching through the system, and that way you can skip all the voice prompts and just beep, beep, beep all the way into your forecast that you need, whether that's for South Central, the interior, or the North Coast. In Fairbanks tonight, if you were dialing into the system, you would hear about a flood advisory there for the central interior, as the middle Tanana Valley is still under that flood advisory, at least for tonight. And into tomorrow there, places like the Salcha River are running a little bit high and strong right now. We did see some pictures of a dock floating down the river there. And again, that was on Twitter. So when you're talking about Alaska weather, make sure you're using that hashtag AKwx, because that lets us know, again, you're talking about Alaska weather no matter where you are, Salcha or otherwise. Here's a look at the fire danger across the region. Of course, if you're in South Central, especially in the Anchorage vicinity or even the Kenai Peninsula, and looking to move northward, you're probably considering the McHugh Creek fire right now that is still going and still being fought very aggressively. The weather is changing, and as that changes beginning tonight with a little bit of a wind shift and then more cloud cover, higher humidity, conditions for fire weather will change, so that does look to bring some improvement to the region. And not just the McHugh Creek fire, but any fire across southwestern Alaska or the interior, including areas around McCarthy. Conditions should gradually improve as wetter air moves into the region with cooler temperatures, higher humidity, and certainly the chance of rain doesn't hurt as well. The fire danger has crept up around Juneau, but not to be too concerned there. It looks like wetter weather is heading your way, and the same goes for Kodiak Island. Of course, we all know that's probably pretty short-lived. So, what's coming our way? Let's take a look at the satellite picture, and you can see on the visible satellite picture there is still a huge swath of drier air. Now, if you were in Homer, Kodiak, chances are you probably saw a little bit of smoke. It really looks like a lot of that over the last couple of days has been coming out of south and western Alaska, drifting toward Homer. Now, if you're in Kodiak, it could have been smoke, but it probably, more likely, was resuspended ash from the Katmai eruption. So, certainly ash has been known to move from northwest to south and east on that northwesterly wind. So we think that's probably ash, but certainly there's a lot of smoke and haze coming out of southwestern Alaska. And if you're further east, you may have seen that from the interior as well. So an awful lot of fires around Alaska. No surprise if you're seeing beautiful sunsets, but of course that comes at a cost of adding particulates to the air from burning fires. Out across the west, the great swirl you see across the Bering Sea is the next wave of low pressure. That's not a very strong system, but boy, does it cover a lot of real estate on the globe. Watch the spin one more time and you can see how that twists and turns and is moving a frontal boundary into south and western Alaska, all along the lower delta regions across the YK and into Bristol Bay. The leading edge of rain has been approaching all day long, and this is just the first change that will bring that southerly flow into south central, and it's also going to move rain closer to southeast. And you can see one of the original waves of low pressure sitting across the eastern Gulf. It's going to get a little bit of an extra push later tonight. Here's the infrared picture. This gives us more of a glimpse up to the north, and I want you to watch the clouds moving in from northwest to south and east. That's the Arctic jet stream, and as it drops southward, it's adding a little bit of energy as well to the incoming moisture from the south and west. So combine the two ingredients now, just like you're making a cake, and we've got everything we need to change up the weather across a large part of the 49th state. The weather coming in from the north and west is the energy and the cooler air. A lot of that really deep cold, though, is still going to stay up north. Here comes the moisture and the energy coming out of the Pacific. And so when you lay it all out on the weather map, you get a 999 millibar low across the central and western Bering Sea, an occlusion stretching all the way down the west coast from the Seward Peninsula almost into south and western Alaska. This is moving rain forward. We also have a wave of low pressure that really hasn't been moving a whole lot across the eastern Gulf. This is just now starting to push rain into southeastern Alaska, but a bulk of the rainfall is coming from what's out west. Out across the Brooks Range, a lingering front sits across the summits and just to the south. That's holding back any deep cold, and temperatures there have been in the 30s, 40s, and lower 50s for a good part of the day. Tonight's forecast shows some pockets of rain across southeast, with high pressure losing its grip on the eastern Gulf. Low pressure still trying to hold on as well at 1,015 millibars. Not much to write home about there. Out across the west and the central chain, you see warmer air starting to lift northward. That's a sign that that wetter air is also moving along with it, as high pressure is going to drop out of the pattern here for a little bit. Low pressure sitting across the interior. And again, that's just a sign that weaknesses are developing in the weather pattern across the state. Things that have been pretty much locked down and in place for a better part of the week or so, with very warm conditions for many locations, those are starting to give way. So as we get into tomorrow, you can see that progression. More areas and more of the interior, not that you've been very dry lately, but more parts of Alaska and Southwest are getting in on some of that rain. Widely scattered showers and thunderstorms possible from the Talkeetnas through the eastern Alaska Range to the Alcan border. It should be relatively limited, as the instability should be shutting down, but the possibility for some convection there, or that upward moving air for showers or maybe thunderstorms, is certainly going to be around. As we get out toward the central and eastern chain, now we see cooler air is latching into this weather system, so we're developing a small cyclone or low pressure wave that's working across the Aleutians. That will continue tracking eastward. More pockets of rain for southeast, so don't be surprised to see more clouds and more wet weather in your day tomorrow. And then a look out west shows light rainfall and showers for the Seward Peninsula and the YK Delta, as well as pockets in the central Bering Sea. And watch for some areas of fog offshore of the north coast. As we get into Friday, the colder air up north doesn't move. High pressure is still in charge, and there may be some pockets of light snow or drizzle with that well offshore. Low pressure will hug the Brooks Range, and it should pretty much stay in place. But the change will come for many across the Gulf Coast as we get warmer air lifting northward, squeezing and wringing out the rain in slow fashion across southeast and the northern Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound. A much better chance for steadier but light rainfall across south central, including the Susitna and Matanuska valleys, as well as south central and areas around the McHugh Creek Fire and the Anchorage Bowl. So Friday is the day to look for a better chance of rain, though you may see some drips and showers as we go into Thursday. Out across the west, showers for the southwest, the Bristol Bay region all the way down to the Alaska Range, light rainfall there, and across the north and along the boundary that stretches well out into the open ocean, rainfall will linger there. So a better chance for rainfall in many locations as we head toward the end of the week. That's the big news. Here's the temperatures today: 50s and 60s for southeast, around Juneau in the capital city, 61, about the same there in Sitka, upper 50s for Ketchikan and Annette, Wrangell, as well as up toward Hyder, 64 degrees today. Prince William Sound, as we get into 60s and 70s there, much warmer in Valdez than it was in Cordova this afternoon, 64 around Whittier, just shy of 70 in Homer around 3 o'clock, 68 in Kenai, and temps held in the 70s again around Anchorage, with Talkeetna around 75, the Matanuska Glacier not terribly cold today, Glen Allen around 71, 61 in Eagle, 63 in Fairbanks, with Healy and Fort Greely in the 50s and 60s. Fort Yukon was 64. AKwx Pass showed up at 54 this afternoon. As you get into the coastal plain, temperatures were in the lower 40s, but out at the coast itself, at Barrow, at Wainwright, 30s and 40s there. Kaktovik only 35. Wainwright was 53 degrees. Kotzebue Sound temperatures were in the 40s and 50s, with Shishmaref at 48, 51 in Nome, 54 out on St. Lawrence Island. Bethel had 58 degrees today. McGrath was a cooler 55. Out around Lake Iliamna, temperatures soared into the upper 60s today, but that was a little bit cooler for you as well. Almost 80 degrees in Kodiak, a toasty day that will probably come to an end very shortly with rain and clouds moving in. 50s and 60s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint was 66. St. Paul and St. George were both in the lower 50s. Adak and Atka chalked in at the mid-50s there, and 50 degrees for Shemya. Now, overnight low temperatures are expected to be in the lower to mid-50s. Bristol Bay in the lower 50s as well. 50 in Nome, 31 in Barrow. Southeast expect overnight lows in the lower to mid-50s, with South Central staying mild in the mid-50s overnight. Fairbanks also around 54. High temperatures tomorrow should brush up into the upper 50s to maybe lower 60s for Southeast. Expect cooler weather to come. Upper 60s for many in South Central and the Cook Inlet region, down to 70 around Kodiak, 61 in Fairbanks. 40s for the Arctic coast, a little bit milder around Wainwright and south and west into Kotzebue Sound. Look for a high of 50 around Shishmaref, 53 in Nome. Bethel's looking for a cooler low around 58, McGrath about 60, and St. Paul about 56, with Dutch Harbor and Alaska closer to 60 degrees. On to flying weather, expect IFR conditions around Wainwright eastward all the way to Kaktovik there, with MVFR a little bit further inland. IFR conditions hovering over Norton Sound in the morning and into the central parts of the Yukon Valley out toward the west, St. Matthew, and MVFR conditions for many in southeast in the morning, stretching all the way out toward Cordova and along the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay. By the afternoon, there's a chance for convection again along the Talkeetnas and eastward along the Alaska Range. MVFR conditions improve in southeast, but hover near Chilkoot and White Pass. IFR conditions expected just outside of Middleton Island and out across the Norton Sound region. Watch for the IFR to pull out to sea just a little bit, but hover over the Bering Strait communities, St. Lawrence Island, and a large chunk of the central and eastern Aleutians. Here's your pass conditions. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions through your Thursday, so looking good there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, though, we'll have to watch for improvements. Watch for a start at IFR as you're heading out there on Thursday. Rainy Pass, we expect to start around MVFR, but improvements toward VFR are expected in the afternoon. We'll be watching for showers and storms in Windy Pass in the afternoon. MVFR to start the day there, and for Isabel Pass, expect similar conditions. For Metasta Pass, watch for showers and storms to develop. We expect MVFR conditions to move in as we go through the afternoon and evening hours. And for Tenita Pass, we expect VFR conditions, showers and storms there. Portage Pass, not looking for convection, but we are watching for the smoke to change directions from south to moving northward as we go through the nighttime and into tomorrow. MVFR conditions are expected there due to cloud cover as we go through the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see MVFR, as I said. Freezing levels indicate some of the coldest air is moving onward into western Canada. In the meantime, freezing levels have moved back up to 8,000 to 10,000 feet across the interior, 14,000 feet across Bristol Bay, and about 10,000 to 12,000 feet across a large part of southeastern Alaska. And there's a new ball of cold air out across the west surrounding that low we saw on satellite. Levels there as cold as 8,000 feet or below. Icing potential, though, for now is way up there, above 10,000 feet for many locations, but there is more moisture moving through, no doubt about that, all the way from the Seward Peninsula to the central part of the Panhandle and out across the west in advance of that low pressure system and out across the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern chain. But once again, that light to isolated moderate is pretty high up there in most cases. Now, the jet stream has a dip in the Arctic jet moving through northwestern Alaska. Those wind speeds around 50 to 80 knots. The real troublemaker here is coming in from the west over the Pacific and rounding that ridge of high pressure. Those wind speeds cutting into Alaska are coming in at 130 knots, but it is bringing rain, and many of you are looking for that. Look for a general southwest flow moving into the west coast. Those wind speeds up north around 10 knots coming into Kotzebue Sound across the south and west, anywhere from 25 knots from Nunivak Island to about 60 knots once you get out toward Port Hayden. Across the northern Gulf, 20 knots from the north and west, moving in from west to southwest across the Panhandle. Winds across most of the interior ranging from 5 to as strong as 25 knots. At 3,000 feet, westerlies are coming in across the interior. Those are only about 5 to 10 knots. The strongest winds right now are still west of St. Matthew and west of the Pribilovs, around 15 to 30 knots. Low pressure set up shop just west of Sitka. Those winds across the south of the low pressure system, about 15 to 25. That brings in more of a southerly flow for most of the panhandle. We're still watching north and northwesterly winds crossing the Alaska range and through the Anchorage Bowl at around 10 knots tomorrow. Turbulence potential, we'll see a few areas develop in the afternoon below 4,000 feet across the lower Yukon and the upper Kuskokwim and around the Alaska Peninsula. Probably the greatest threat for some stronger bumps, we'll call it occasional moderate, could be there across the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula west and south of Sandpoint below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with a sea ice update as well as your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
NOAA's national marine sanctuaries protect areas of national significance for their exceptional natural beauty and resources. Research and monitoring expeditions provide scientists with valuable knowledge about the biodiversity and ecological integrity of these fragile underwater systems. The knowledge does not come easy. Their mission is challenging and sometimes dangerous, but these risks pale in comparison to the wealth of information that awaits them. This is Expedition Sanctuary Quest. Preparing a research vessel to go to sea is a huge undertaking. Over the course of one day, the empty ship transforms into a high-tech research platform. Tons of equipment, provisions, and supplies have to be loaded and stowed. The crew must double-check every last detail. Once at sea, the ship must be entirely self-sufficient. To keep everything running smoothly, the crew charts a cruise plan to coincide with the schedule of research. The goal of this expedition is to assess the health of offshore and nearshore marine ecosystems. The NOAA ship MacArthur will spend 2 months at sea, focusing on all the national marine sanctuaries along the West Coast, from Southern California to Northern Washington. Research takes place around the clock, and as night closes over the sanctuary, a team of special map makers deploy their side-scan sonar. The sonar will provide acoustic information to make detailed maps of the ocean floor. As one set of scientists are finishing up the night shift, another is being called to start their day. Wake-up calls come early, usually before the sun is up.
Hey, Sarah.
By dawn, Chief Scientist Sarah Fangman is on the bridge, checking the plans for the deployment of the remotely operated vehicle.
Our weather has turned a little bit, and so we're going to have to move to a more protected area where we can work. Well, as long as we're heading in this direction, because the weather is forcing us that way, we'd like to stop.
Once calmer waters are found, the science continues. The remotely operated vehicle crew prepares their machine for its dive. The ROV allows the scientists to penetrate the unexplored depths, which account for 90% of the ocean. There is no idle time. While the ROV is being prepared, another group of scientists takes seawater and surface plankton samples. As the samples are collected, they go straight to the onboard lab, where they are processed and analyzed.
The ROV can stay down many hours, whereas divers are limited with supplied air, and we can rotate shifts and go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
The cameras on the ROV are the scientists' eyes into the ocean. These cameras will confirm what the scientists have found through the side-scan sonar mapping. The ROV also allows scientists the opportunity to do species counts and more detailed habitat classification.
Guys, look at the anemones and the corals, cup corals.
Oh yeah.
That is
excellent.
gorgeous.
Excellent. Habitat's changed dramatically.
Yeah.
Oh,
did you
nice
see it just
one.
caught
Right.
that?
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Oh yeah.
A research ship can be a dangerous place with hazards all around. Everyone must be alert to these and know how to deal with emergencies. Fire and evacuation drills are performed without warning at any time of the day or night. As the science work goes on, the ship's crew also works around the clock. Engineers keep the engines operating properly, while the deck officers constantly monitor the ship's location. The deck crew operates all the machinery needed to perform the research, and the galley crew has to be sure all 40 people on board get fed. As night falls again, another shift of scientists begin their work in trawling for plankton.
Half moon out there, so there's quite a bit of light, which will affect how fast and how high these critters come up in the water column.
Okay, watch the slack there, folks.
Okay, got her. Let her go.
One more step in measuring productivity of an area.
Juvenile deposits, krill, squid, copepods.
After a long, wet night, dawn finally comes. The ship begins a transit to the next area for work. As miles of ocean slide beneath the hull, the observations and data collecting continue. Seabird and marine mammal observers are out working. Bird and whale counts help determine the health of a given area. For 2 months, this grueling schedule of day and night scientific work continues, searching for the understanding that will provide solutions to better manage resources within our national marine sanctuary.
Here's a quick check of today's sea ice edge, and the area in white is ice concentrated over 80%. The light blue is 80 to about 20%, and here's the open water south and west of Wainwright. You can see a large bit of that very concentrated ice is still pushed right up against the coastline around Barrow. There is some more slightly open water between Barrow and Dead Horse, but not by much. Those concentrations can still be fairly high. The northerly winds are keeping a lot of this thicker ice closer to the coast for right now, and that westerly flow will also keep any ice that's out west kind of pushed toward the east. So continued thicker ice around Barrow and just to the west. The latest on this anytime at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. Thursday's forecast in southeast, light southeasterly winds coming up the inner channels, about 10 to 15. Stronger winds as you get into the Lynn Canal at 20 knots with 4-foot seas there. South and southeasterly flow in the outer coast, 15 knots with a 5-foot sea in all areas. By Friday, more of a stronger southerly push coming up the outer coast, 20 to 25 knots in all areas. 5 to 6-foot seas are expected there. Look for winds to move from south to north through the Lynn Canal, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea, and a stronger south and southeasterly flow coming in from 20 knots with a 4-foot sea in the central and southern parts of the Panhandle. For south central, look for a southeasterly wind inside of Prince William Sound, a 10-knot wind with a 2-foot sea. Southerlies a little bit on the outside at 15 knots. Westerlies crossing the Barrens and Kodiak Island, 20 to 25 knots with a little bit more of a northwesterly wind coming off of Kodiak Island, 25 knots with a 7-foot sea there. South and southwesterlies move up Cook Inlet tomorrow, and again that could push some smoke into the Anchorage area, so be aware of that. Rain will be coming in behind that for Friday with a better chance for many, and the winds become a little bit more variable with a 10-knot wind and 2-foot seas inside of the northern Cook Inlet. Westerlies coming across the Barren Islands and into Kamishak Bay, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, 5-foot seas east of the Barrens, and 25 knots off of Kodiak Island with an 8-foot sea. Light southeasterly winds feeding into Prince William Sound at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea on Friday. across the Alaska Peninsula, and inside Bristol Bay we go. Westerlies inside of the bay at 20 knots with a 6-foot sea, and westerlies continue down the Bering Sea coast. Northwesterlies are expected between Castle Cape and Chignik with 20 knots with a 7-foot sea there on Thursday. For Bristol Bay on Friday, 25 knots from the north and west, 6-foot seas are expected, and across the Pacific coast, 20 to 30 knots with an 11 to 12-foot sea on Friday. For the Aleutians, west and southwesterly winds will be picking up 15 to 30 knots in all areas, anywhere from 4 to 7-foot seas across the eastern chain. Across the Pacific coast, those seas will be higher, 12 to 13 feet, and 7-foot seas across Kiska to Attu with a 15-knot to 20-knot wind from the south and west on Thursday. By Friday, you can see that southwesterly flow is staying put there across Kiska and Attu. 6-foot seas to about 7-foot seas all the way out toward Adak. 7 to 8-foot seas across the Bering Sea coast, 25 knots there with 15 to 20 from the south and southwest all the way across the Pacific coast on Friday with an 11-foot sea south of Unalaska and Nikolsky. Across the west coast, southwesterlies moving across the region with 7 to as high as 10-foot seas around St. Matthew, 20 to 25 in all areas. More of a westerly flow outside of the Kuskokwim Delta. That becomes northwesterly on Friday, 15 to 20 knots in all regions of the Bering there with 5 to 6-foot seas. In most regions, with the exception of the Pribilofs, 20 knots with an 8-foot sea there on Friday. And for the North Slope, northerlies again working that ice closer to the coast. Northwesterlies around Kaktovik and eastward, and an east and northeasterly flow for the Chukchi Sea. 5 to 6-foot seas there, becoming 5 to 3-foot seas a little bit further to the south. Northeasterly winds remain light across the Beaufort Sea coast as we go into Friday. Let's look at your marine weather. Let's recap what's going on around the rest of the state. Rainfall is going to increase from west to east as we go through tonight. Southerly winds develop across south central and inside of Cook Inlet and the Turnagain Arm. Light rainfall is expected to develop across southeast. That will increase in coverage and likely pick up as we head into Friday, and the same goes for south central. There's a slight chance for a few showers and thunderstorms generally north of Anchorage across the Talkeetnas and the Alaska Range as we go into Friday, and a better chance of rain for many as we go into the end of the week. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.